Hello, everyone. This is Ashraf Omar Alakhras from the family in the north of Gaza. The story of my lands or our farm, it is really, really, really big. We can write books.
Ashraf is 43 years old, and he's from Beit Lahia in northern Gaza. Until just recently, that's where he was, on his farm. He loves it, the community, the smells.
And just people walking to the farm and smelling the cucumbers, smelling the tomatoes, smelling the apples, smelling everything in the farm.
It's a farm that's been in his family for generations.
My relationship and love of farming began when I was 5 years old. Seeing my grandmother farming and singing traditional songs while she was farming attracted me a lot. Each tree in the farm has a story. How we plant it, how it is growing, and how we harvest.
For months, Ashraf has been talking to Nilu Tabrizi, a visual forensics reporter at The Post. They've been exchanging messages through WhatsApp about the farm and about life in Gaza.
And kind of right from the beginning of our conversations, he would just start flooding my phone of images and videos. I think such a sense of preservation in our conversations so that these memories and these realities aren't destroyed forever. He also sent me this video of his son playing, being chased by his uncle and laughing, and just kind of like that beautiful moment of life.
When the war began last fall, Ashraf's life and the farm turned upside down.
His family was just forced to try to survive as much as possible. They tried to find shelter in different parts of Gaza. And so his story is pretty typical to other farmers in Gaza in that their livelihood is destroyed.
From the newsroom of The Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm Martine Powers. It's Tuesday, June 11th. Today, as the push continues for a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, we hear the story of Ashraf Omar Alakhras and Nilu's investigation into the state of food and farming in Gaza. So Nilu, before we hear about Ashraf and his family's story, I would love to hear about your investigation, because I know it's basically impossible for international journalists to access Gaza right now. So how did you go about this in terms of getting a close look at farming there and the overall food situation in Gaza?
For me, like the driving question was just, if the war ends tomorrow, what are people in Gaza going home to? And for us, we could use things like satellite imagery to basically be able to see the land from above and to make damage assessments. So we could do things like get a damage assessment of how many tree crops were destroyed. We could get a damage assessment of how many greenhouses had been destroyed during the war. Things like heavy machinery tracks on soil, compresses the soil, makes it really difficult to farm again. Things like airstrikes also affect soil in a really negative way. So that really helped us get a full picture. And as well, different UN agencies, different humanitarian agencies have also been documenting the state of agriculture and foodstuffs in Gaza.
And when you think about the history of farming in the Gaza Strip, what has that looked like?
So the story of farming in Gaza is very much farming under resistance, right? Or farming under extreme pressure. Even before the war, many of the fruits and vegetables in Gaza were imported, and the ability for Gazans to feed its own people has been limited for nearly 2 decades because of a strict blockade by Israel and Egypt, which was put in place after Hamas seized power in 2007.
The Israeli government wants to tighten the screws on Hamas, but it's ordinary Palestinians who are feeling the squeeze.
So Israel had controlled all but one border crossing. Electricity has always been limited. Water supplies have been limited in Gaza.
The roads have turned into sewers.
And even the whole idea of fishing, which is really important to the Gazan diet, that's been restricted too. So fishermen could only go, offshore by a certain amount, or they could risk getting shot at by Israeli forces. Mm-hmm. And so they had to figure out how to be resilient in this system of immense pressure.
And it sounds like even under those challenging circumstances, though, that farmers and people who feed Gaza, that they historically had found a way, that they had been able to produce things that really flourished.
Absolutely. I mean, life existed, right? Even though that life was under extreme pressure, food was able to be produced at a certain level by farmers in Gaza.
Just out of curiosity, do you have a sense of what kind of farmland we're talking about? What it looks like?
So there's a variety of farming activity in Gaza in this relatively small strip of land, right? There are olive groves, there's greenhouses where things are being grown in this hermetically sealed environment. There's tomatoes, cucumbers, there are fish farms that create their own projects and even use their own wastewater to kind of grow attached vegetables and things like that. So there was a lively agricultural world. Just looking at the landscape of Gaza overall, almost half of it was farmland.
And I know that you've spoken with many people involved in agriculture in Gaza. We heard at the beginning of this episode one farmer, Ashraf. Tell us a little bit more about him and his farm.
Yeah, so Ashraf Omar Alakhras is from a big family in Gaza.
I was born to a family of 8 brothers and 7 sisters, and I am number 8 of them. Agriculture for me is everything.
His family farm is in Beit Lahia, which is in the north part of Gaza near the border with Israel. The area is known as the food basket of the Gaza Strip. Every time we talked about his farm, he kept really emphasizing the fact that this land was passed down. He inherited it from the family members that came before him.
The first stage, the olive trees that my grandfather planted on this land are a witness until now.
He talked about things like the olive trees that his grandfather planted still existed. And so kind of like that deep generational tie was really evident every time we talked about it. But he farmed everything.
Orange, lemons, almonds, apricots.
Anything that I asked him, he's like, yes, we farm this. Eggplants, strawberries, greenhouses, almonds, other tree crops.
Grapefruit, peaches, potatoes, beans, cucumbers, tomatoes. The apple trees were very famous.
He had pretty sophisticated greenhouse projects, solar panel projects, irrigation projects. And he also talked about the house that they built as well, that they lived in a 3-story house built in the Italian style on their farmland. So they were very, the whole family was living there along with farming the land. So he sent me this one video and he said, this video makes me so emotional. It makes me cry.
In fact, I cannot describe my feeling that day. This was my little brother's wedding in September 2022.
It was a video of a pre-wedding ceremony at the family home in Beit Lahia. And in the video, there's women there that they're singing, they're trilling their voice, they're clapping. And Ashraf there is so playful. He's dancing along as well with the women. Mm-hmm. And it's just this scene of joy. And it just feels like what was once like a normal, beautiful, playful life.
It also sounds like Ashraf's family has taken steps to try to modernize or to use new technology to help their farm. Can you talk through a little bit about that?
He had big dreams of how to expand this farm. He had greenhouses, so creating these environments to keep farming year round. He also was in the middle of making these proposals to take waste from farms and create it into animal feed to produce a local product and preserve the environment. He's really thinking about the future.
And how has Ashraf dealt with some of the challenges that have come up when it comes to how difficult it can be to have a family farm like his?
Ashraf never once spoke to me about the difficulties in being a farmer and being under this type of pressure. I think if anything, he would always speak about farming from a place of joy, even though we know how difficult it was. Every video that he would show me would send me of his land, of being in the greenhouse with one of his young kids, his family there. There's so much joy that he spoke from. And maybe this place of joy masked the difficulty. But for him too, he keeps talking about how his biggest wish is to return to his land.
Yeah, can you talk through a little bit more of what happened after October 7th and after Israel's invasion of Gaza?
At the beginning of October, he sent his wife and kids to Deir al-Bala, away from the house. He stayed with his mom until November at their family home in Beit Lahia. And eventually, at the beginning of November, they evacuated to the Jabalia camp for a few days, and then kind of started this period of moving around in Gaza for safety. So the family then in January went down to Rafah and stayed in Rafah until the end of February. And then by the end of February, they were able to gain passage to go to Egypt. He told me that his main goal is to try to keep his daughters kind of in school, keep them learning, and help them forget the horrors that they saw during the war.
So it sounds like Ashraf has been with his immediate family, but do you have a sense of what's been going on with the rest of his family?
He told me,
My family is not in the best condition. There have been times for them when they ate the animal foods, and there was a real famine. And also communicating with each other was very difficult, as communications had been cut off.
Ashraf has lost many members of his family. He told me that at least 35 members of his family have been killed during the war. Wow. And he's saying at least because he says there's a handful of people that are unaccounted for that we haven't been able to hear from. But 35 people at least have been confirmed to be killed.
Wow. And what is your sense of the state of Ashraf's family farm now?
He sent us photos that some of his family friends had taken. It's completely destroyed. Because it was close to the border zone near Israel, there were bulldozer tracks, and as well, his land was hit with airstrikes.
The entire farm was a shock. The destructions of these farms means the destructions of life and the entry into real famine of the people who is living there.
Just thinking about this idea of reconstruction seems really daunting for Ashraf and farmers in his position as well.
After the break, what we know about the extent of agricultural destruction in Gaza and what it will take to rebuild there one day. We'll be right back. So, Nilu, you mentioned earlier how you went about investigating the story of Ashraf's farm and how you used satellite imagery to get a closer look at what's happening on the ground in Gaza, particularly since you and other international reporters can't be there in person. I'm curious, what did you see in those images? Like when you were comparing images from before the war and after, what does it look like and what's different?
Yeah, so we use satellite imagery analysis in order to visualize what this looks like. So we looked at a satellite image from April 2023 of the Gaza Strip. And in that satellite image, you can see a very robust kind of urban sprawl in Gaza City. And to the north of Gaza City, you can see green agricultural fields. And as well in the center, you can see green agricultural fields. And then you can see kind of an urban sprawl in Khan Yunis and Rafah in the south. And then when we looked at the image from April 2024, which should be the same time period, right? A lot of those green fields are no longer. So from the satellite imagery, what was once green in April 2023 is now kind of brown or completely discolored in April 2024. It's a game of training your eye to look a specific way. And so then we would zoom in on different parts of the Gaza Strip. We could see, oh, like this right here is a demolished greenhouse. And we know that because we looked at the image from a year ago. A year ago, there was a greenhouse. Right now, there's nothing there. We were able to see even smaller details like destroyed water wells and things like that. So then being able to zoom in, you get an even more detailed picture of what the destruction looks like. So looking at Gaza Strip overall, close to half of Gaza's olive and fruit trees were destroyed or damaged as of April 3rd. So close to half of that being destroyed is really striking. And in North Gaza, the losses could be high as 71% due to the intensity of fighting in the north.
So I want to hear more about the impact that the destruction of these farms has had on the population. I mean, obviously this has had a huge consequence for Ashraf and his family, and I imagine so many other farming families in similar situations. But like when it comes to the state of starvation in Gaza, how much is that attributable to not just the lack of humanitarian aid coming in, but the fact that these farms that were already there have now been destroyed and that the people who would manage these farms aren't there to help them produce?
It's really difficult to measure because we don't have a good understanding of, okay, this is this X output for this X season, right? We can't actually like data-wise be able to point that all these farms being destroyed equals no one's getting food. But I think something that's really important to note is that bakeries have been, the front lines for humanitarian aid agencies delivering food to people. And there have been, a ton of bakeries that have been hit with airstrikes, or if they've come back online, there's no fuel to run them or no clean water. So at every level, because the food infrastructure system is so connected, that just like damaging a few parts of it really affects the whole.
What has been Israel's response to the destruction of agriculture in Gaza that has taken place since the beginning of this war?
So I contacted the Israel Defense Forces to ask for comment on the level of destruction in Gaza's agricultural sector, because we were able to document such a wide swath of damage. And they said, quote, Hamas and other terror organizations unlawfully embed their military assets in densely populated civilian areas. And they said that their actions are based on military necessity and in accordance with international law. And by military necessity, they mean their operations in response to Hamas's attack against Israel on October 7th. So they didn't answer my question directly about damage to farms, despite follow-ups from us about that.
And what has the reaction been among international aid groups to this state of the effect on food infrastructure right now?
The international community has been very clear. We spoke with Maximo Torero, who's the chief economist at the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, and he said that the level of food insecurity due to what has happened over the war is at a critical stage. He said this is completely man-made. There are thousands of lives and potentially hundreds of thousands of lives that are now at risk. It's not a storm, it's not a flood. This is completely man-made. This idea of food and farming under conflict and the protection of food infrastructure for civilians, it's being highlighted at every stage of the conversation globally.
And then for you, Nilu, as someone who has been looking at this so closely, I just wonder, what image are you left with? And how have you been thinking about the state of things right now?
I think about the life that was in Gaza before the war started. I think about this fish farm that we found in the Central Strip that was completely destroyed. And, it's another example of how Gazans were farming and fishing under severe pressure. And what's really heartbreaking as well is this fish farm called Al Bahar Restaurant and Fish was located on Rashid Street. when Rashid Street is now the main road where aid convoys travel. So this once bustling restaurant with a lot of life and this picturesque deck over the Mediterranean Sea is now on a major aid convoy route and is completely destroyed. Now this area is going to be more known for the place where aid convoys come through rather than for this restaurant that once was.
So coming back to Ashraf, what does he make of all this now, and where does this leave him and his family?
Ashraf is living in a state of limbo in Egypt. It's just hard for him to imagine what his farm looks like now.
The farm now I cannot describe. As the image stuck in my mind is the beautiful image I left on it. And I cannot imagine that it was destroyed. Despite some pictures being sent to me by my big brother, if you want me to describe it to you, I am still convinced that it is fine and it is a piece of paradise and it will remain so.
He's had a few more family members, being lucky enough to get approved to come through the border and helping them resettle. But he's completely in a state of limbo. I mean, his consideration day to day is taking care of his young kids, taking care of his family. And all he says is he wants to go back to his home, to his land, to his mother who remains there. And so he's just completely stuck watching this from afar.
To be honest, the most difficult part of this war is the separation from family and the difficulty of communicating with each other. And this has affected our psychology a lot. I wished very much that I had at least stayed with my mother because I miss her very much. My 3-year-old son misses her very much and stands on the balcony every day and calls her by name to come to be with us.
Ashraf is telling us about the pain of family separation, right? His son is in Egypt calling out for his grandmother, who is back in Gaza. And even today, Ashraf gave us an update. He said that his family house, which is more than 100 years old, was just destroyed a few days ago. The experts that we spoke with, they said that reconstructing Gaza could take decades. But despite that, whenever we talk to Ashraf about going back, what it looks like, his desires, he can't picture a future without his farm. He has endless hope.
After all of this destruction that happened, yes, I will return because it is food for the soul for me.
This optimism that he has goes back to how closely tied he is to his generational farm. And that is kind of like where his resilience grows from.
Nilu, thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Nilu Tabrizi is a visual forensics reporter at The Post. She reported this story with The Post's Imogen Piper and Miriam Berger, and with help from Hee Yin, an assistant professor at Kent State University. Before we go, we've got some big news from Hunter Biden's federal trial in Delaware. He has been found guilty of lying on gun purchasing paperwork and unlawfully possessing a gun. The verdict came in just after 11 a.m. today. According to our reporters at the courthouse, Hunter Biden showed no emotion while the verdict was being read. He nodded his head and hugged each member of his legal team. He left the courthouse holding hands with his wife and with First Lady Jill Biden. This conviction came after a week-long trial. It included wrenching testimony from current and former Biden family members about Hunter's struggles with addiction. Prosecutors argued that back in 2018, Hunter made 2 false statements in filling out paperwork to purchase a gun, lying and saying he was not addicted to or using illegal drugs. Here is special counsel David Weiss talking about the case on Tuesday.
Ultimately, this case was not just about addiction, a disease that haunts families across the United States, including Hunter Biden's family. This case was about the illegal choices defendant made while in the throes of addiction, his choice to lie on a government form when he bought a gun and the choice to then possess that gun. It was these choices and the combination of guns and drugs that made his conduct dangerous.
Now the question is, how will Hunter Biden be sentenced? The charges against him carry a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison. But as a first-time offender, he's likely to face a far lighter sentence. He also faces another trial later this year on tax evasion charges. Shortly after the conviction, President Biden put out a statement reiterating his support and his love for his son. He also affirmed that he will continue to respect the judicial process as Hunter considers an appeal. That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. If you're looking for the latest updates on the big news of the day, check out our morning news briefing, The 7. We bring you through the 7 stories that you need to know about every weekday morning by 7 a.m. You can listen to it wherever you listen to podcasts. Today's show was produced by Alana Gordon. It was mixed by Sean Carter and edited by Monica Campbell. Thanks also to Reem Akkad, Peter Finn, Layla Barghouti, and Elise Samuels. I'm Martine Powers. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from the Washington Post.